the final video in our series on classification and ecosystems. I know you're so sad that it's so close to being over, but we're going to just enjoy ourselves for this last one. And remember, because I'm on video, you can watch me over and over again whenever you feel like a hit. Alright, so our last little section is about ecosystems, but in particular we're going to look at these things called food chains and food webs. Now you probably did a little bit on this in primary school, so now we're going to come together and go a little bit deeper into what level we expect you to do this year. So to begin with, let's have a look at what is an ecosystem. So we often hear this word, but trying to remember what an ecosystem is that essentially we've got lots and lots of living things that exist in a particular area, and they all interact with each other. And all of those interactions are what make up an ecosystem. So it could be interactions between bacteria and frogs. Yeah, and so both of those things are living. So that's part of the ecosystem. It could be an interaction between the sunlight and the plants. Yeah, so that's a non-living thing and a living thing interacting with each other. But an ecosystem is just all of those things put together. So let's have a look at living things in particular. So living things, organisms, they need food of some sort to live. So they also depend on each other within an ecosystem for food. So not all organisms, some organisms can make their own food, and I want you to think about what kingdom they might sit under. But when we're talking about animals, all of our animals are heterotrophs, or they have to be able to consume food in some way. So to begin with, we're going to back up a little bit and start off our ecosystem. An ecosystem has to start with a source of food. And if these guys, your animals, have to eat food, where are we going to start? So what I'm hoping you thought is with some plants. Yes, or these are organisms that are autotrophic. So these are ones that can make their own food. So plants are living organisms. They do need energy to survive, but what they have is the unique ability to make their own food. And so these guys are always at the beginning of a food chain. So I'm going to really briefly run through the process that they use to make food. We do this a little bit more detail in Year 8. If you want to know more, please ask your science teacher or have a look online, because photosynthesis is a really cool process. So when we say that plants make their own food, they're doing it using this process, and this process is called photosynthesis. Now what that means is photo, the beginning part of the word, actually means light, and synthesis means to make. So it's making stuff using light. So plants have the ability to take in light. They also have the ability to take in carbon dioxide from the air, and they take in water, mostly from their roots. And what they do is they use, with the sunlight and the chlorophyll, which is the green stuff in their leaves, they use that to make two things. They use it to make oxygen, which funnily enough they don't need very much of, and they give off a lot of it. But the most important thing they make is sugar. Okay, so the plants use the sun's energy via this process of photosynthesis to transform carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and sugar, or glucose. But the oxygen is not what they need. The oxygen is a waste product. So what the main thing they need is that sugar, that glucose. And that's because animals come along, and these guys are actually what we call a consumer. So they need to eat food to survive. So animals can't make their own food. We know that. We can't make our own food. We can't survive on sunlight alone, and we are an animal. So they have to eat other organisms to give them the energy that they need. And this is the same as we discovered when we did our 5 kingdoms. This makes them heterotrophs. So when we talk about them in a food chain, we're talking about them being consumers. So you can call them a heterotroph, that's fine, but they are also a consumer because they have to consume or eat food to survive. So there are different levels of consumer, and they depend on where you are in the food chain. So you can have primary consumers, and these are the guys that consume your producers. Then you've got secondary consumers, and they consume your primary consumers, like school, yeah, primary school. Now you're in secondary school. If you go beyond secondary school, you can go to tertiary education or like uni. And then sometimes you even get quaternary consumers. So these are the guys, so a primary consumer will eat the producer, a secondary consumer will eat the primary consumer, a tertiary consumer will eat the secondary consumer, and a quaternary consumer will eat the tertiary one. But the quaternary consumer is the fourth level. That's what quaternary means. And if you're doing French, you might see some related aspects to that word with the word for four, which is cut. All right, so 3 different types of consumers that you may have heard of already. I'm hoping that you have. So the first one we talk about are the herbivores. So the herbivores are ones that eat plants and plants only. So these guys can otherwise be known usually as primary consumers because they are the first ones to eat the producers. They are eating them. The next group we're talking about are the carnivores. So these are the ones that eat primary consumers, at least. Yeah, so they only eat other animals. They can't survive on plants. So these guys are your lions, your tigers, your wolves, your crocodiles, your sharks, all of those. They can only survive by eating meat. So the next group that we've got, this is the category that we fall into. We're this kind of consumer. We're omnivorous. So we have a bunch of different teeth in our mouth that let us know that we are probably omnivorous or designed to be, have evolved to be omnivorous creatures. So we've got these big fat molars down the back here. They're great for grinding up plant material. And then we've got these very sharp front teeth, are great for tearing apart flesh or meat. So this is what you can look for in omnivores to make sure, to see whether or not they can eat both. So if you can see that they've got different types of teeth, that's a really good hint. It might be interesting for you to look up what is a pure carnivore's mouth look like versus an omnivore versus a herbivore as well.